All right, everybody. Hey, you're listening to WFMU East Orange, WXHD Mount Hope, worldwide, on the World Wide Web and beyond, to WFMU.org. This is the best show on WFMU here from 8 until 11 tonight. We've got an exciting show tonight. Nostrodamus scholar / expert John Hogue will be on later in the program. Let's start things off with a little music, though.
Just do it, don't talk. Time of you unless you sing your song to me. The smell of your sweet skin does entangle my dreams. May I stand here a while, living your smile. Oh, how could you ever know the least you have done was to warm my heart when I was alone. How can my giving find the rhythm and the time of you unless you sing your song to me? The smell of your sweet skin does entangle my dreams. May I stand here a while, and the time of you unless you sing your song to me. The smell of your sweet skin does entangle my dreams. May I stand here a while, living your smile. Oh, how could you ever know the least you have done was to warm my heart when I was alone.
All right, everybody. Hey, this is the best show on WFMU. Here each and every Tuesday night from 8 p.m. until 11 p.m. My name is Tom Scharpling, here with you for the remainder of the program. I am your host. The phone number, 201-200-9368. The email address, TOMS, T-O-M-S, at WFMU.org. You can call or you can write, and the emails will show up instantaneously. Well, we've got a pretty exciting show today for you. In about 35 minutes, we're going to have a very special guest. Nostrodamus scholar John Hogue is going to be on the program. He is the author of a few different Nostrodamus books. I will get the titles for you in 2 seconds. Let me just grab his bio here. I'll read the titles of his books in a little bit. I'll read them, but he will be on the program for the 9 o'clock hour, which should be exciting. We'll be looking forward to taking your phone calls throughout the program for John Hogue. Anything you want to know about the predictions of Nostradamus, whether it be in association with 9/11 or any other major event. But that's later in the show. Right now, why don't I tell you what we heard? We heard from the Unrest album, Imperial FFRR. Full frequency range recording, the band Unrest with Imperial. Going back to 1992. Oh, gosh, excuse me for yawning. I apologize. Before that, the former leader of the Unrest, the one and only Mark Robinson. His latest solo recording is called Canada's Green Highways. And we heard Wonderful from Mark Robinson, and that is a 2 for Tuesday set on the program. Before that, we've played stuff from it throughout the past few weeks. Vincent Gallo, the filmmaker, writer, director, actor, rapper, model, musician. His album entitled When. We heard Honey Bunny. Good stuff from Vincent Gallo. And starting us off, the one and only Tim Buckley. From the set entitled Works in Progress. We heard Da Nang. Good stuff there. Again, the phone number, 201-200-9368. It is Open Phone Tuesday for the next 32 minutes. Does that come out over the air? It's me turning the microphone stand. I don't think you probably at home can hear that, but here in the studio it's a little loud, so. Okay, I'm just adjusting the microphone stand here. Again, you at home, you're probably hearing maybe a little squeak way in the background. You don't know what that is, but okay. We are now adjusted officially. And the computer is up and running. Your emails, thomas@wfmu.org. You send them I reads them. Hey, what did I want to talk about? I had something there I was going to talk about. What was I going to talk? Oh, by the way, I want to thank Dave. He's the producer of the program. One of the producers, the other producer being me. Dave is if you call, you get to talk to Dave, and it's very exciting because he's an exciting guy. So anyway, there was something that I was going to talk about, which now I am completely drawing a blank on. What is it? Oh, that's right. Is it the Scooby-Doo trailer? Was that what I was going to talk about? Yes. Hey, the trailer for the movie Scooby-Doo now is online, and you can check that out. Okay, that ends that conversation. So, hey, why don't we get back to the music? No, I'm not done yet with that. This is the warm-up now. This portion of the show is like it's the tune-up hour. 8 to 9 is the tune-up. 9 to 10 is that's when we catch a fire, so to speak. I think that's a reggae term, but I'm going to apply it to this program. We catch a fire. 10 to 10:30, we gather ourselves and we gain our bearings. 10:30 to 11, cool down period. 8 to 9, tune-up. 9 to 10, catch a fire. I'm even going to extend the catch a fire period from 9 to 10:15. We catch a fire. 10:15 to 10:45. We gather our bearings. 10:45 to 11. It's a cool down. And at 11 p.m. you can hear Nickel and Dime Radio. The one and only Small Change in studio. Tonight he's got a special guest. He's got Small Change welcomes Congo Roy Shanty, one half of the legendary group The Congos, whose debut Heart of the Congos album was produced by Lee Perry and recently reissued on Blood and Fire. He'll talk about the group, new recordings, and helping Lee Perry build Black Ark Studios. So tune in for that with Ira and Kush from Jammyland is what it says at the end of that announcement. I don't know what that means, but I'm sure you can learn more about it from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. during Nickel and Dime Radio with Small Change. So anyway, how about that Scooby-Doo trailer? Check it out online. Okay, that ends that conversation again. We're going to bring that back and close the door on that again. Oh, I know what everyone's doing. Everyone's watching Undeclared right now. Is that what they're doing? Undeclared? Is the show that good? It's not that good. It's good. It's not great. This show's better, I think. Maybe not. What do they have? Special guest Adam Sandler? Oh, see there, I just lost half the audience. Everyone's switching over now to Undeclared to check out special guest Adam Sandler hanging out with the kids from Undeclared. Maybe this isn't the best time to talk about the Friends of Tom phenomenon and how it grows, because now it seems like a shady proposition at best. It might seem like you'll end up on the losing end if you sign up. So I shan't discuss that now. You know what I shall discuss? Rock and roll music. And how we're about to hear a little bit of it from a good friend of the program, Mr. Bobby Kahn, here on WFMU. 9 p.m., the Nostrodamus scholar John Hogue will be on the program. Let's listen to some music here in the tune-up portion of the program. Something from the new Bobby Kahn album coming at you in 45, 44, 43, 42, 41, 40, 39, 38, 37, 36, 35, 34, 33, 32. Oh, wait, we got a phone call coming in here. I think people don't want to hear the counting. WFMU, you're on the air.
Hi. I just want to ask you a question on how great, or, well, let me rephrase this. How good was the Scooby-Doo trailer?
Did you see it?
I haven't had a chance yet, unfortunately.
On a scale of 1 to 10, I give it 3.5 stars.
Oh, that's all? Oh, that's not too bad.
Aha, see what you were mistaken. You didn't listen closely.
Oh, on a scale of 1 to 10, you give it 3.5 stars, so that is good then, huh?
I think that's a 7
Okay.
out of 10.
Oh, of course, yes.
Do you know what he said? You know what Scooby-Doo says in it?
What's he say?
You'll have
Right.
you'll have to check the trailer out to find out. I'm not going to burst anyone's bubble.
Okay, sure enough.
All right. Thanks,
Okay,
guy.
thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
Bye. You know what would be a good exercise right now? I want to make sure the phones are good for our special segment with Mr. John Hogue. So let's get some calls in here. We'll get some test calls, and I just want people to call up and say, "Just helping out the show." That's all I want right now. That's all you have to say. Just helping out the show. (201-200-9368). Help out the show, would you? Let Tommy get the phone system working. You know what, though? I don't even want you people to call. Oh, here we go. Let's see if the phones work. No. Let's try this. WFMU, you're on the air.
Hey.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi. Who's this?
It's Natalie.
Hey, how are you tonight?
Good. I'm over my cold.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah, I know. Can you tell?
Can I tell that you're over your cold? Yeah, kinda.
Yeah.
This is fantastic. How'd you get over the cold? Did you rest?
No, I took a lot of drugs.
Like what? Like cough syrup?
Yeah, Sudafed. That sort of thing.
Ah, well. Hey, what's going on with you now, Natalie?
Going to school?
And is that fun?
No, not really.
Not really?
No.
Well, hey, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Uh-huh.
How about now?
Yeah.
How about now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just checking the phones out. I got to get ready.
Okay.
Are you excited about my big guest?
Yeah, I'm totally pumped up.
Do you know who Nostrodamus is?
Yeah, I actually had to do a report on that when I was in middle school.
And do you have any questions?
It's great. I might. I don't know. I don't really know what he's going to say yet.
Well, you have to. If you think of any questions, feel free to call.
I will.
All right?
Okay.
Well, thanks a lot, Natalie. Hey, I still haven't gotten that special package
I
yet.
know. I'm not in charge of the package.
I just want to make sure that it's not
Kate
lost
2.
at the post office or, in the... It's Kate 2. Come on, Kate 2. Get with the program.
you remember the other night when she decided to drop the 2, so she's just Kate now?
No, you don't like that though, do you?
No, she's trying to beat me out.
You don't like
to be the Kate.
She's just the Kate, but you're the Natalie.
Yeah, I'm still Kate 1.
You're still
Yeah,
Kate 1, yes.
Yeah.
She is trying to one-up you a little bit there.
She is.
With the whole dropping the number thing.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thanks for calling. Call back later.
Okay. Well.
Thanks for. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. WFMU, you're on the air.
Hey, Tom, how are you?
All right. How are you doing?
All right. I got a stupid question for you, but
Sure.
you know that movie Shallow Hal and that other movie High Fidelity?
Uh-huh.
And there's that actor Jack Black?
Yeah.
And I always read the reviews, and they're like, otherwise known as Tenacious D.
Uh-huh.
What is he? What is he a musician, or what does he do?
Well, that's a band kind of. It's like
That is
him and
band.
it's like a funny rock band.
Kind of like a Bare Naked Ladies?
No, it's actually like you're laughing with them, not at them, like the Bare Naked Ladies.
Uh-huh. What are they like? Are they any good?
Yeah, they're kind of like as if they act like they're the largest band on earth, like they're the biggest act going, except it's just 2 guys with acoustic guitars.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, I think. Hey, are you on the internet?
No. I have email, but I'm
Uh-huh.
not. I don't have a computer that I can go surf around on.
Uh-huh.
Would you recommend it? It's not like some stupid thing.
Now, where do you check your email? On the back of your ice truck?
Not work.
No, where?
At
when
work.
When you
When I should
when
be
you-
working.
When you deliver the 8 editions of papers in the city in Hell's Kitchen,
Why are you saying that?
or do you do you do that when you maybe
When I'm putting the tokens back into the video game machine,
when you're doing the maybe when you're doing the
I patch into the internet through the video computer.
the rag, when you go around from door to door collecting rags?
Oh, by the way, I saw that dancing thing you were talking about. That video game where you duplicate the dance steps.
Oh, you did see that?
Yeah, it's really.
Isn't that insane?
It's really got no rhythm. It's like square dancing.
It's really a stupid game. Which I'm gonna plant some seeds now. Get your Friends of Tom memberships in. Are you a friend of Tom yet?
No, but I guess I can.
Because you have to email. You have email access. So email
Yeah.
thomas@wfmu.org.
Are you gonna have a membership card, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Within 10 days, the card will be at the printers.
Good. You
Okay.
haven't spoken about movies you've seen lately.
I actually haven't seen a lot of movies lately.
Okay.
Oh, what are you going to do? Life is weird, huh?
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm going to play some music, then get ready for my guest.
All right. Thanks.
Well, thanks for calling.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
We got one call here. Is this FMU? You're on the air.
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
Hi, it's Todd.
Todd?
Yes.
Todd who?
You're the guy you called a chicken a long time ago.
Oh, Todd K, right?
That's right.
That's right. How are you doing, Todd?
I'm doing pretty good. I want to ask you a question.
You're
Tom.
like the Newman of my show.
Yeah, it's kind of fun being in that position, but
Uh-huh. Yeah.
sometimes I'm a nice guy too.
Uh-huh.
Tom, how old are you?
32.
Okay.
How old are you?
39.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am.
How come you stammered on your age? What's your birthday?
1962. October 2nd, 1962.
Okay. All right.
I don't remember Kennedy getting killed, but I do remember Nixon against Humphrey in '68. But Tom, do you know why I asked you your age? Because a couple weeks ago I tuned in and I heard those, I guess, teenage girls.
Uh-huh.
And some of the callers, and your show seems to appeal to kids of that age. And I know, I don't know, I guess you didn't realize it was me on some previous calls where you had to cut me off, where I was talking about on holiday, and you cut me.
I got to do it again.
And you cut me.
I got to do it again. Come on, guy. It's called the FCC. Look into it. Oh, let's get back to the music. Here's something from Bobby Kahn.
White Widow. You're into ecstasy. You wanna try it. Hand in my turkey. 10-minute drive. I can get you high. I can get you high. Kick me, kick me, kick me, kick me. and let me down. You just bang and the lights so low. Just one more dance and then we're good to go. Waiting for someone who needs me. Almost racing at the speed of light, but that don't mean it's gotta be tonight. Baby, 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 baby. My heart is singing love.
I told myself I'd never fall again. Promised myself I'd stay out of the usual trouble I get in. And I saw you walking in your prime, and you're perfect right on down the line. Are we really seeing eye to eye? I broke a promise to myself. I broke a promise to myself. I broke a promise to myself. Broke a promise to myself. A promise to myself. I told myself I'd never move again. Promised myself I would turn away from the houses of women. In the glory of your old world style, and the comfort of your domicile, you invited me to stay a while. I broke a promise to myself. I broke a promise to myself. I broke a promise to myself. A promise to myself. A promise to myself. Sweat and tears were meant for choking. Promises were meant to be broken. Might get away with it with someone else, but you always get busted when it's to yourself. I told myself I'd never fall again. Promised myself that I would stay away from the troubles I get in. Well, I'm walking at a low point now. As far as I can see, the snow comes down, and I just can't be let you stay with me somehow. Broke a promise to myself. I broke a promise to myself. Broke a promise to myself. Broke a promise to myself.
All right, hey, it is 9 p.m. here on the best show on WFMU. We've got Nostrodamus scholar John Hogue coming up in about a minute. Let me tell you about the music we heard first. Governor. Break a Promise. We actually heard it from the album The Hunt, which came out a few years ago, 1996 to be more exact. The Strokes versus Christina Aguilera. There's the song by The Strokes called Hard to Explain. And somebody matched it to matched the vocal from the song Genie in a Bottle, the Christina Aguilera song, to the Strokes music. So we heard the original, and then following that we heard the remix called Stroke of Genius. The Buff Medways featuring Billy Childish. Before that, the album is called This Is This, and we heard No Mercy. And starting us off, Bobby Kahn, by request, from the Golden Age album, we heard Pumper. Now, everybody, listen to this music while I get my guest, Nostrodamus scholar John Hogue, on the line. One moment. Okay, let's see if we are good. Oh, no. I'm going to have to try back in 1 second, John. Thanks. Okay, we're still working on this. Hold on. Keep listening to this, though. Okay, John, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for coming on the show. My guest is John Hogue, who is a, I guess, how do you like to be referred to, John?
Well, I like to consider myself a rogue scholar.
Okay.
Because of an early understanding, at least from my own experience, that education system is really a de-education system, and that if I were to understand things. I would have to start understanding things from my own direct experience. On top of that, the alliteration of rogue kind of fits with Rhodes Scholar, which is, I've probably done enough work to have, at least as far as the paperwork and study is involved, had been a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford on prophecy. Unfortunately, there's no opportunity for that field in Oxford, so here I am, being a person who likes to look at things from a different point of view from the mainstream.
Okay, and I guess your area of the most attention you get would be your expertise in the area of Nostradamus.
Well, I would say that as for now, since 1986, when I started writing, are now 9 books on prophetic traditions of the world, 6 of them being on Nostradamus exclusively, that that is one aspect of my work. Later this decade, I think I will be releasing more books on the other aspect, which is the study of new religious movements that are what you might say, posing the question, today's cults could be tomorrow's great religions.
Okay, but I guess we'll focus on Nostradamus tonight, because
Nostradamus is certainly a subject that I've studied for the last 30 years, and that comes from my fascination with the predictability of not only past history, but scriptures and seers who foment or form views on future history.
So, I'm sorry. Yeah.
There seems to be a pattern that one can find, and I've studied. For years, I studied thousands and thousands of books on the different ways in which it seems humanity continues to repeat itself, even though the technology changes and the styles of morality and fashion change. It seems like humanity doesn't really change. It just keeps repeating the same cycle of war and peace and tragedies and triumphs, but it's sort of in a rut. And after about 7,000 books of study in the past of history, I became interested in all the scriptures of different religions and other groups that had their traditions recorded in the native prophecies and others that showed a similar pattern of predictability that is imposed upon our future. And Nostradamus, of course, if one is to study future history, one cannot avoid the man who cast a giant shadow over the last 500 years of prophetic study, and that's Nostradamus.
I guess for people who, I'm as far away from being an expert on the subject as you can be, and I'm sure a lot of the people listening are in the same boat. Who was Nostradamus? I mean, if you had to give a condensed version of his life.
16th century man from France, from Provence, which it was an independent country until around the time of his birth, which was 1503. He died in 1566. He was, by profession, a physician, and there are documented empirical evidence that shows that he was quite a great healer for his time, and there are even some histories that look above and beyond his rather eccentric habit of making predictions and printing them, that just on the merits of his own healing skills and the witnesses who saw them, that he basically healed 3 cities almost single-handedly from suffering the plague. It seems that he had an advanced understanding of hygiene and had, I guess, a very legendary bedside manner that these 2 issues made him quite successful as a 16th century doctor. Later in his life, when he kind of retired from active practice, he married a second time, and his first wife and children died mysteriously from a disease that some people say was the plague, although there's evidence to show it was a bout of malaria, which doesn't seem to be something he was experienced in curing. And when that happened, when he was in his 30s, he went through a huge spiritual crisis which is often what happens to great mystics and seers, wherein their world, their American or French dream or whatever dream you want to promote, is shattered, the dream promoted by society, and then they have to look at life anew. They have to become rogue scholars of their own truth. And Nostradamus did this and wandered southern Europe for 6 years and then came back and distinguished himself as a healer. Then later had a second wife, and in his 40s began writing these amazing predictions, 40s and 50s. And in 1555, he published the first of what would be his book called Les Prophéties, which was the prophecies, which had 10 centuries or volumes of 104-line quatrains that are all indexed, mainly because even in his own time, which he gained great success as a publisher of prophecies, many of them came true in his time. He was sort of a Gene Dixon of his own time, in that he documented predictions that were fulfilled. And you can see the conversations between embassies to the Paris court of the King of France, talking about the prophecies. He was trying to write a history of the future, and apparently tried to mask it in obscure, very consciously conceived, obscure language, so that he said, so that it would not cause the harm upon certain masses of how to put it. It's, you see, his language is difficult to say in English, so I will just make it short and simply say that he said that if people of the future could see how their current sensibilities and current opinions about religion, morality, politics, and just anything about life that they value, if they were to see how vastly changed all of that would be in the centuries to come, they would turn back and damn their own future. And so with that reasoning, he said, therefore I cloaked my work in obscure, wild, poetic fervor, and the reason being that I think he made it a little difficult for us, so that on the one hand, people wouldn't damn their future and do something to make it worse, but not too completely obscure so that certain intuitive people can pick up some of the warning signs about the future.
So, and they are written in, you said 10 centuries of the thing, but I guess everybody talks about the quatrain as the standard.
Yeah,
that's the standard quoted form that we see.
Standard unit of his prophecies. Although there were 2 prophetic letters, as well as some extant quatrains that were in his almanacs, his annual almanacs. But I mean, the total of his prophetic production was around 1,477 predictions, most of them in quatrains. It's very important to understand that in his own time, people were producing books under his name that were complete frauds.
Okay.
And this is one of the reasons why he indexed his prophecies. And it's one of the reasons why, even to this very day, even after the attack on the World Trade Center on September 11th, right after that attack, a prophecy attributed to Nostradamus was picked up by Reuters without checking and verifying its veracity and sent all over the news media outlets. And it seems that people never learn. Here's the predictability factor. If people 400 years ago, when Nostradamus was alive, were getting all excited about prophecies that were false attributed to him, it seems that we have not learned that lesson 400 years later, because this prophecy that was brought out about the city of York and the great towers falling and all of that is a complete fraud. Mm-hmm. And a very clever one, because it takes some real lines from Nostradamus, enough of the real lines from 2 quatrains that probably do forewarn us of the World Trade Center attack. It takes enough of the lines and mangles them up enough so that your memory might say, well, yeah, I remember hearing something about that before, but there's no index on the prophecy, and that's when you can always smell a rat about these prophecies. When, like, for instance, the earlier one last year was when the village idiot will be elected in the year 2000. No indexing. Of course, that was a diatribe against the president. And then before that, in the mid-'90s, somebody was trying to conjure up the bloody glove, we'll do this and that, as if Nostradamus would care one whit about a U.S. trial.
Yeah.
I say this because many people who write on Nostradamus do not look at the old French, the Renaissance French, and the contexts in which Nostradamus would have seen the future, the filters from his own conditioning that would color his own perception of the future. And the very fundamental fact that any good scholar of Nostradamus understands is that Nostradamus is, in his remote viewing of the future, is very concerned with mainly events that affect his homeland of Provence and, in greater extent, France. There are probably less than 10 references that you could pretty much say are about Hesperia or Amarish or Amorica, the names he gives for America.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them do deal with this new city, these new city prophecies, which I will speak of shortly, that may be about New York. Otherwise, very little is said about anything beyond Europe.
Okay, and when he talks of we'll talk also later about the Antichrists.
Yes.
Were they all, did he give specific geographical locations for where they would arise from?
Yes. There's a couple things. First, what I will do for you is I will read these two prophecies related to a third that give a rough dating for the time where the third of these three antichrists that he foresaw would appear. I mean, the names of all three have been coded in his prophecies, and they tend to have it within them most of the letters that you need to spell out. The first was called Napalanois, which is a Corsican. Napalan is a Corsican spelling for Napoleone, which was the name Napoleon had before he switched his name in 1799 to the French version, because he was born in Corsica, so it had a more Italian spelling to it. Napalanois, Napoleon King. The second was a fellow who obviously was born on or lived on the ancient name of the Danube, which is Hister. Hister, with a play on the Gothic S, is the classic decoding and anagrams for Hitler, who did grow up on the river Danube. The third Antichrist is given the code MABUS, Mabus. Now, there are a number of interesting decodings of that, and for most of the years that I've been writing about Nostradamus, I have concluded, because of Nostradamus' love for classical metaphors as a place to hide his secrets, that the name Mabus is based on a clue that says this third Antichrist would worship the infernal gods of Hannibal. Now, Hannibal was a Punic warrior, fought the Romans for Carthage. Carthage, when it was destroyed by the Romans, the city and the city's god were given Romanized names, which were Thurbo Majus, M-A-J-U-S. In a classic anagram switch, Nostradamus often wrote in anagrams, word plays. You replace the J with a B, you get Mabus. So my sense is that this third Antichrist is someone who is in the region who would have worshipped in classical times the gods of Baal, the B-A-A-L, which is the Phoenician gods, or god, that was worshipped in what would be modern Palestine, Syria, Iraq, and North Africa, Libya, Egypt, on the coast of the modern day, these modern countries. So who then might fit in a code for these names. One that fits is a classic anagram game of reversing letters of a word to get another word. So Mabus, M-A-B-U-S, if you reverse it, becomes S-U-B-A-M. You can reverse any letter that can be reversed again a second time. Well, B becomes D. So suddenly you have Subam becoming Sudan. You use the other law of anagrams. You can replace one letter with another. You can spell Saddam, as in the Arabic word for the one who confronts, which is the name Saddam Hussein. The other thing that you can use is just a simple spelling of the words, M-A-B-U-S. You look at a certain name that might fit it. Well, if you take the correct phonetic pronunciation of Osama bin Laden, the terrorist in Afghanistan, you get M-A-A-U-S-B. In the laws of anagram, you can drop one A, the redundant A, and you can move the B, you get Mabus, from Osama bin Laden.
Wow.
But just to show you how, before you get too fixated on this potential way of deciphering this, I'm getting hundreds of letters from people who believe that Mabus is in some way an anagram for our president.
Okay.
So, just for argument's sake, let's look at that. Okay, you can take an M and reverse it upside down to a W. Any letter that you can do that with, you can do it in anagram play.
Mm-hmm.
So you have W-A-B-U-S. In the laws of anagram, you can replace one letter with a new letter. So you drop the A and put an H at the end of B-U-S, and you got W, Bush.
Wow. So it really is an open-ended
well,
form.
It is, and you know, it's like any this use of Bush's name is an easy way out. Mm-hmm. That's why it takes more in-depth scholarship. You've got to understand the mind of Nostrodamus. You've got to understand of how he would use words to describe the future, and that takes years to understand. And it is clear, I think the evidence is heavily against it being, at least Nostradamus' opinion, that the third Antichrist is our president. And the evidence, as one can find in my books, like Nostradamus, The Complete Prophecies, and which is currently out in the bookstores right now, and Nostradamus, The New Revelations, I go in depth to show you how it is really about a Middle Eastern, North African figure.
Mm-hmm. Now, did Nostradamus refer to the Middle East frequently?
Yes, because in his remote viewing, I mean, certainly not as frequently as Provence or France or Italy, but as far as a far foreign place, l'Orient, the Orient, which in his terms was not, we think of Orient, we think of the Far East. In 16th century, that word was used for the Near East.
Okay.
So a lot of the dilettante Nostradamus scholars who think that write books about China and this and that are really missing the fundamental use of that word in Nostradamus' time. So yes, there are a lot of references to it. There are perhaps one of his biased filters in his own time is that in his time the evil empire, quote unquote, was the Ottoman Empire, which was in the 16th century was threatening Western Europe quite a lot, especially from the south where he lived in Provence. And so some of the trauma of that might be filtered into his view of the future, where he saw the same Arab empire revived again because of the finding of a new source of wealth. And he does say that in one of his prophecies. Mm-hmm. I would assume that new source of wealth is oil. Mm-hmm. And this, by the way, is the same man who in 1555 predicted in one of his quatrains that in October of 1727, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire and the Persian Shah would write a peace treaty that would be detrimental to Christendom. Detrimental because they wouldn't be fighting each other. Mm-hmm. And indeed, And he describes in detail the places that are changed and all, and this was written in 1555, documented to be written in 1555, and it was fulfilled in October 1727 by people at the time who couldn't have even been influenced by his work because they wouldn't even read it. It was in another region of the world.
I guess another basic Nostradamus question would be, how did he, what was his process for forming his predictions?
He used a number of techniques that he only intimates, like a good magician would, and not divulge the secrets, mainly because anything that he would use would be only useful in triggering his own trance state because of his particular makeup as a human being. But we can say from his indications that he was one who did read the Keys of Solomon and had probably Fusino's Latin copy of it. From the original Hebrew. He probably had as his Bible the Latin copy of Mysteriis Egyptorium, which was a book he could have purchased in Marseille that related to Chaldean, Assyrian, and Babylonian magical techniques as well as Neoplatonist techniques. To make that easy for the layman, he essentially used trance-like states and used the help of what he called divine media, higher souls, to show him, often through the use of hydromancy, which is a prophetic technique of staring into a bowl of water and getting into a certain trance state where you suspend yourself beyond your own egoistic limits into a more cosmic state. I mean, some of his words on the matter sound like he is trying to describe what some theorize as a time continuum, that he gets into a state where you are basically in an eternal now, where all events, past, present, and future, are happening simultaneously. This might explain why some of his prophecies are retroactive, where in what he would call so often the dark and shadowy potentials of future tragedies and tribulations were actually the dark shades of events that happened before his time. And it's also often clear to me, at least, that he sometimes viewed the future darkly and had a hard time understanding what was going on, and also saw sometimes events as one event when they were compounded upon each other as many events. For instance, if there's a lot of prophecies that don't make a lot of sense concerning a German invasion of France unless you understand that or test it by saying, okay, these are actually two invasions that he's mistaken as one. If you see it that way, suddenly it all makes sense, and he's actually in detail describing military maneuvers that took place in 1914 and in 1940, when the children of the first invading Germans invaded again under Adolf Hitler's rule.
Okay, I got a question emailed in here from Howard in, I believe he's in New York. He says you used the term remote viewing, which he was curious about because he said guys like Ed Dames and other people he hears on Art Bell use the same term. He was wondering if you think it would be something along the same lines.
Well, it is, but I think in a more pure sense than what is a bit sensationalized on those shows. Nostradamus makes many references, about 654 references to geographical locations in his 36,000 words of prophecy. If you were to put needle those on a map and see a graph of where he's speaking, you would find that the more dense the references are, the closer they are to his physical proximity in Salon-en-Croix, now known as Salon-Provence, where he wrote his prophecies in 1555 through 1558. And from gathering from that empirical evidence, it seems that one could say that his viewing of the future was made remote by distance. the farther physically it was away from where he was making the predictions, the less you hear references. You hear occasionally references about Hesperia, which in his old language means the land of the evening star, which one could then translate as America, because that would be over the Atlantic. He played, for instance, with a word Amorica, which is actually a province of Bretagne, which is in the far nose of the French landmass, if you will, pointing west. But the way he talks about it, if you study the history of that region, none of the things he's saying attribute themselves so well to that area. They attribute themselves much more to a modern place that he also calls the Le Nouveau Land, the Nouveau Terre, or New Land, which is sometimes called Amerish, which would be America. So this one thing that they did, you might say, remote view into the future is a description of a place that is attacked, that's next to the Garden of the World, that is, he calls it the Great New City with hollow mountains. Now, I'd like to read for you these two quatrains, which I and a few other Nostrodamus scholars for at least 15 years have been discoursing on as a potential reference to a future attack on New York City.
Okay.
The first one is Quatrain 97 from Century, or Volume 6, which says, "At 45 degrees latitude, the sky will burn. Fire approaches the great new city. Immediately a huge scattered flame leaps up when they want to have verification from the French." He uses the word Normans, but this stands for the French. Now, let me read the next prophecy, which is in tandem to this, from another volume, but the same theme comes up, with the clue being the new city. She only references to about 4 times in the prophecies. Quatrain 49 of Century 10 seems to take on the same theme by saying, "Garden of the world near the new city, in the path of the hollow mountains, it will be seized and plunged into a boiling cauldron, or tank, or vat," that's what the word can mean. "Drinking by force, the waters poisoned by sulfur." Now, let me take this apart a bit. When I look at these two prophecies, the first thing that comes to mind is, if he's talking about a great new city, it's a city that was not in existence when he was alive.
Okay.
So if it's great and new, and if latitude 45 is an attempt to geographically locate it, then one starts looking for great and new cities that did not exist in his time. Now, the other thing one who is sensitive to the way Nostradamus uses his language might do is, since he's using the word nouveau, new, that kind of leans towards something west of France in the new land that he keeps talking about. So, is there any city that is near or on latitude 45? Well, yeah, Rostov-on-the-Don in the Donetsk region of Ukraine, Russia, southern Russia, is right on that, but it's not a great new city. And it was already there hundreds of years before Nostradamus was born. So that's the only one that really hits right on the mark. But if you look towards the new lands that he implies, you look towards latitude 41, 42, you find the great new city of New York. Also, the second prophecy links a little stronger to New York with the hint, Garden of the World. Garden, when Nostradamus uses a statement like that, it's often using a subtitle to a more popularly known title for something. He plays that game a lot, and so you start looking around to find anything that might have garden in it as an important name. You find that the very state that you're sitting in doing this show is called the Garden State, New Jersey.
That's correct.
And it is next door to the Hollow Mountains. If you stand on the Hudson, look across from Jersey City, Up until recently, you saw the great hollow mountain ranges topped by those two Everest towers, the World Trade Center.
We're 2 blocks from the Hudson River here in Jersey City.
It is, and when you consider that a man from the 16th century who saw the highest church spires that weren't even 5 stories of those hollow mountains, which were 110 stories high, he would certainly consider it like a mountain, a hollow mountain, because it's full of people and quite hollow inside with floors, each floor being an acre in size. Now, the attempt, it's very important in studying Nostradamus to find out from eyewitness accounts of history what actually happened, because when he looked in his bowl of water, or when he used other techniques to awaken an ability to see potential future history, he clearly watched it like a movie. And he smelled it, he heard it, and he saw it. Those are often the ways he talked in those senses. So it's important to understand that he's not going to be sitting back in some pedantic way looking at this and having it told to him. He's going to feel the impact of it. Sometimes I think in his writing, the emotional impact kind of fogs his ability to understand what's going on, as it would any human being who was suddenly thrust 500 years into the future. Imagine if you or I or the listeners were thrust 500 years into the future to see such a vastly changed world and vastly changed values and technologies, and then see some kind of great disaster like this, where the fireball, for instance, that is so famously photographed and reprinted of the South Tower's eruption after the collision, that fireball was as large as the town of Salon-Provence that he lived in. So a huge scattered flame suddenly leaping up would be something that a man who lived in a much more depopulated time, where a city like Salon-Provence, with its 4,000 souls, would be considered as big as New Jersey today, when Paris was considered a super city at 260,000 people. These huge hollow mountains suddenly being seized and plunged into a boiling cauldron. I mean, this statement I didn't quite understand until the morning I got up and I was actually called from Europe, awoken by my agent and other people saying, "You've got to go to the television. It has begun. The thing you've been talking about is happening." And so I turned on the TV just in time to see the second jet cleave into the South Tower. And then as I watched the two towers and the way they collapsed and the way they just boiled in their own debris, it brought to mind exactly what the old French word cuvée, for fermenting cauldron or pot, would mean to a man like Nostradamus, who had in his secret study a large alchemist's cauldron where he often poured materials into it, plunged them in, and they would boil and ferment and melt because he made cosmetics as well as medicines. And I'm thinking this man is trying to reach for a description, a metaphor that he can understand. And it just clicked to me, at least this is my interpretation of it, that he was saying when he says, "It will be seized and plunged into a boiling cauldron," that he was describing these two huge stick-like, candle-like skyscrapers being pushed into the boiling cauldron of smoke over their own debris fields.
I actually got an email from Portland, Oregon. Somebody named Dave is, he says he's a transplanted New Jerseyan, and he pointed out something in that quatrain which I did not realize until, I guess, the path of the Hollow Mountains?
Yes, in the path of the Hollow Mountains.
Because a funny thing is that if you stand on the Jersey City side for the Hudson, the path train that would take you to the World Trade Center is right on the water next to where you would look at the Twin Towers. So I don't know if that's
amazing.
It's called the path. I mean, it's like, I guess it's the Port Authority Trans-Hudson. So it's the I don't know if that has any bearing on the thing, but I mean that.
The French line is dans le chemin de montagne cavée. So, excuse my pronunciation, but that is so chemin is path in this case. So it is interesting in English whether he could have meant it because he uses Jardin du Monde, Garden of the World, and he uses monde, not world. But I think in his own language he often would translate for himself into French the things he saw.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that you have garden from Garden State, world, the fact that there used to be a oasis of palm trees under glass that was in between the two towers, was kind of a garden area for people to rest. That's implied. I mean, we might be stretching this, but certainly it has for me, both these prophecies have for me a very strong sense of being about events that have just taken place, especially the final line of the first one I read, when it says, when they want to have verification from the Normans or the French. Since 1985, I've been writing articles saying that if this is about modern times, something that's going to be very important that the victims of the attack are going to be asking the French for. And we'll know that this is about, that when that line of the four lines is revealed to us, then we can say this is about this event. Now, it has come to my attention since September 11th, several sources from Associated Press, from Le Figaro, which is a newspaper in France, and others, which heavily point to a warning being sent by French intelligence to American operatives about an imminent attack of Al-Qaeda operatives on the French embassy in Paris. On September 10th, that warning was issued to America. You could say that in the following day, when they want verification of this hinted attack, the planes came down on the towers.
Wow, I didn't think. Hey, would you be willing to take a few calls?
Yes, and we could go to the other hour, too.
Absolutely. We'll go as long as, we've got a lot more to talk about. So the phone number is 201-200-9368, and you can also email in a question at toms, T-O-M-S, at WFMU.org. We hope the phones are up and running. WFMU, you're on the air.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment on this gentleman on the air.
Okay.
First of all, the French are an enemy of the United States. They've never supported us. Number two, Nostrodamus has as much validity as Insane Clown Posse.
Oh, wait, let's take it a point at a time.
Well, first off, those two statements are heavily laden with bias.
Well,
and secondly,
caller, let Mr. Hogue speak, please.
And secondly, one has only, rather than talk about it, just look at the information that has come out from many sources that show that the French, indeed, whether they are trading information with the U.S., which the two sides do, you give us some information, we'll give you some back. It's not in that friendly a way, and that was being done in this case. That was taking place. Now, to your second point, that depends on how much you've read of Nostradamus. How much have you read? How did you come to this conclusion? What translations have you studied?
The Insane Clown Posse have an apocalyptic theory about the Joker's card.
That's not my question. Will you answer my question?
I hung up. He's just...
Okay, let's move on to somebody who's...
Well, let me ask you a question right now. Where is the line for you in terms of how much you can read into one of the quatrains? I mean, is there a point where you say, okay, maybe I'm putting more of me into this than Nostradamus was putting of him into it?
Always. In fact, I am probably, it is not a boast to say, it's a fact that more than a lot of my colleagues in this field, the subplot of most of my books is really to look at prophecy and how we project ourselves onto prophecy. We project our hopes, our fears, and at the same time the study of how Nostradamus projected himself on what he saw in the future, and that it is responsible scholarship to not deny the potential of seeing the future, but to also see ourselves in the magic mirror darkly and how we project our ideas. For instance, if you have an idea that America equals France equals enemies, then you are not going to see anything else if you hold on to that. And certainly in my work, I'm often saying, look, these are my interpretations, and it is, at the very least, the study of Nostradamus is a study of what we project on his obscurity. Also, with that said, there are hundreds of prophecies that the skeptics do not touch, which name names, places, details that show clearly that if this was the work of a charlatan, it would have never gotten out of the 16th century.
Okay. Well, WFMU, you're on the air with John Hogue.
Hi, John. Hi, Tom.
Hi.
Yeah, I got a couple comments. One, it seems like when it comes to Nostradamus, a lot of times whenever a disaster happens or something that changes the world, like an event, usually people kind of tend to refer to him more so after the fact. A lot of times I never really hear people saying, Nostradamus said in 2003, this is going to happen. You know what I mean? Like, people tend to not tell you ahead of time.
Well,
why is that?
Well, that's a good point, and it's actually, yes, generally most people only get interested in this habitually through hindsight. But in my book, like Nostradamus, The Complete Prophecies, I show how over the last 4 centuries, there have been interpreters of Nostradamus who have documented warnings and understandings of things to come before they happened. Mm-hmm. It's really, it is true that people only seem to be interested after the fact, right. But it is also true, but less examined, that people had been constantly right in warning using Nostradamus. One case in point was the Fontbrunn the Elder, who in the 1930s clearly saw that Century 4, Quatrain 80, talking about a great fortified ditch on the eastern frontiers, which implies the French eastern frontiers, dissected in 15 places by water. He made a study of it, and I concur in my own studies that any great fortress, subterranean fortress defense line in history, there's only been one in history that was dissected by 15 rivers, and that was the Maginot Line, which was built in the 20s and 30s, and sometimes was 6 floors deep into the earth with its subterranean fortresses. And they thought it would be like the MDS of their time, the missile defense system of their time. They thought that if they could build this huge fortification, that the Germans would never invade them again, and they fell into what was called a Maginot mentality, where they just figured they just looked the other way when Hitler got stronger. Now, you've got Nostradamus talking about how that wall will fall, and then he talks about how the invasion will come, and it's not in code. It's right out there. He says, the Ardennes forest.
I have one other question for you.
Now, just to finish, and then we'll go to that question.
Okay.
Fontbrunn, by publishing these statements, earned the ire of his country. People called him a defeatist, an anti-French person, and the argument didn't stop until Hitler was getting tourist pictures in front of the Eiffel Tower. But you see, here was a warning that people ridiculed, and then they're silent when it's fulfilled. Mm-hmm. It is just, unfortunately, the conditioned nature of humans that we are, in our unconscious and habitual ways, we tend to be curers of our mistakes rather than aware enough to be preventers of our mistakes.
Okay. So, you have a second question,
Yeah,
Colin?
I have one other quick question. In your honest opinion, and I don't know how you can put a number on it, but how accurate would you say he is? I'm sure there's been some predictions that have not panned out. There must be, the guy cannot be 100%, right?
No, because to be
that he's totally wrong.
To be 100%, one would have to have, would go against the very essence and nature of existence. Even a rock moves.
If you had to, just at a crazy number, I know it's probably really difficult, but if you had to say 75%, 50%, how accurate, in your opinion, would you say Nostradamus was?
The problem with this question, which I often get, is the the question is honest, but it's kind of missing the point in what these prophecies are, because you can't make a percentage, because many of the prophecies sound like they were close to what actually happened, but things changed. It kind of, the problem with prophecy is that there's free will involved in it. Prophecy is dynamic, just like life. It changes. If things are heated and then they don't happen, you might say that the most successful prophet is the one who people heed and everybody prepares for things, and then none of the dire things he says happens, and he looks like an idiot.
Right. Well, that was my point before, that, like, ahead of time.
But what I can say is that there are hundreds that indicate clear success. There are hundreds of prophecies that look like they almost hit but were off. For instance, an indication, to give you an example of one set of prophecies, you have one prophecy that describes his contemporary king dying in a jousting accident. But there's 15 prophecies that describe the very same king going on to unite Protestants and Catholics, and intimating that he'd die in the 1570s rather than 1559, and being the second Charlemagne. Now, clearly, those sets of prophecies, including the one about the jousting accident, were the cause for Nostradamus to be invited to the court of France in 1556 to explain himself to the king and queen of France. Since he left the audience with his head still on his shoulders, I can only surmise, because we don't know exactly what was said in that secret meeting, but I can only surmise that he was probably telling the king about the two futures that were foreseen. One being that he would live as a great king, the other being that he would die in a jousting accident. Now, if you, in your free will, do the one and not the other, you negate the other. Now, certain wags and Monday Night Football skeptics will sit back and say, well, you see, these 15 are wrong, therefore he's wrong, and they're missing the whole point, that prophecy is as dynamic as life, and since this man wrote so many prophecies, he was describing many things that could happen that in our present time we can change.
Okay, thank you, caller. Do we have another call? WFMU, you're on the air.
Yeah, I think the main problem really is that I think I speak for most of the detractors when I say they just can't believe in the notion that a human being can actually predict the future or see future events, because of the fact, two main things, because it can't be proven scientifically, and it never has, and it would not even hold up in a court of law.
Well, okay, those are good points. Let's look at that. Those are also what I would call rather fundamentalist assumptions. That and pretty sweeping. I would say they've probably made those conclusions by not actually reading the prophecies of Nostradamus. Am I correct?
His phone conked out on us.
Oh, too bad.
So.
Well, we won't be able to scientifically answer that question, but I will answer it by just giving you one prophecy that is very clear about these things, that show that, yes, people can make predictions of the future, for instance. And maybe I should save it till the next hour.
Okay, we can do that if you want to. That's a little teaser for the next hour. We can do that, absolutely. But I guess. How
much time do we have? My clock may not be right here.
We have as much as you want. It's 5 of 10 here. So
okay. We have 5 minutes. Okay, I can do it.
There's another hour. There's another hour and 5 minutes for the program, so we'll go as long as you like.
Okay. Well, this will simply so there's no ads coming at the top of the hour.
No, we are commercial free.
Oh, okay, great. So I'll just go ahead. There's a quatrain 25 of Century 1, which states, "The secret, long ago forgotten, shall be rediscovered by Pasteur. This shall take place when the current astrological lunar cycle comes to an end. He will be revered as a half-god-like figure, a demiom. And then, by rumors that are foul, he shall be dishonored. Now, if you look at this, secret long ago forgotten, somebody by the name of Pasteur reveals some forgotten secret. Now, Pasteur is the old Latin name for shepherd, and it's mentioned only twice in 36,000 words of Nostrodamus. The other quatrain that mentions it talks about the pastor of Rome. Shepherd of Rome would have to be a poetic allusion to the Pope. Now, this other pastor, the key to unlocking this is in the second line, which talks about the lunar cycle. A grand lunar cycle, if it's current, has to be the one that started in 1535 and it was scheduled to end in 1889. So here's the link. You have a man named Pasteur, and you have an important event that is related to this man to come in the year 1889. And this man's got a nickname, Half-God. And he's scandalized, and he's discovered some secret. Well, if one actually goes beyond just making sweeping overviews about this, and if one gets scientific, one looks at the history of 1889 in France, and you indeed find a man named Louis Pasteur instigating, creating the Institut Pasteur in 1889. The Encyclopedia Britannica of that year described him as Pasteur le demi-homme, the half-god. He is one noted in medical science as discovering a thing long ago forgotten. That would be that germs create disease, and pasteurization, vaccinations are some of the things that he is involved with creating. And he was scandalized in his own time, but more importantly, he was scandalized again in 1995 when a new book that translated his private notes was published, which showed that his statements about using and testing his vaccinations on animals was a lie, that he actually was a bit of a Dr. Mengele. He was testing his vaccination techniques on children.
Oh, wow.
So, it's very easy for the lazy skeptic to kind of be predating the vast herd, if you will, of Nostradamian quatrains that are obscure. But I rarely find even the more famous skeptics taking a ride on the horns of a prophecy like this one, and there are hundreds of them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, caller. WFMU, you're on the air with John Hogue.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I have a question regarding an email a friend sent me that had information on a certain quatrain.
Yes.
And this quatrain states that Nostradamus not only foresaw the existence of the 1980s Nostrodamus documentary, The Man Who Saw Tomorrow, but he even got the name of its narrator, Orson Welles, correct. And if I could read that quatrain...
Well, first, before you read it, so that there's one important hurdle you must follow, otherwise it's not even worth reading. What's the quatrain number and century number of that prophecy?
That's what I needed your help with. Can I read it to you?
Okay, we will listen to it, but I want to caution the readers that this is where you need to be, as the Greek word means, skeptical, which does not mean dismissive, but very alert, because any quatrain that you're given by anyone that doesn't have those numbers is just like taking a verse from the Quran or taking a verse that's attributed to the Gita or the Bible, and it has every chance of being either a blend of a couple things or a complete fraud. So with that caution, go ahead.
Okay, well, I shouldn't say he actually mentions Orson Welles by name, but here's what...
I've never seen that in all my 30 years, but go ahead.
Well, he does not by name, but here's what he.
Okay, go
here's what
ahead.
I have.
Go ahead, caller.
From Cain, a great whale shall come forth to speak of the prophecy.
Oh, please. That look, that I've translated. No. I mean, there's no
Hear me out.
There is no.
Hear me out. Are you going to listen to me or not?
Well, I mean, is this
there is
Mr.
no
Hogue, is this
translation of whale, sir?
Host
in Nostrodamus.
Host.
Yes.
The great whale.
How about some time for me?
Okay. Just in the spirit, we'll let him finish his quatrain.
Yeah, let him finish.
Here's the rest. And I think this seals it. The bearded glutton shall perish within 5.
Oh, that's absolute bunk. Let's go on to something else.
All right, how about this? Can you tell me what will happen next season on my favorite show, Crime Scene Investigators?
Okay, well...
You are obviously one of those lazy skeptics who's just a wag,
Okay,
so
well,
go ahead.
we
Let's
said-
go to the next one.
We say goodbye to him. I should say you are listening to WFMU East Orange, WXHD Mount Hope, worldwide on the internet at WFMU.org. My name is Tom Scharpling. I'm joined on the telephone by John Hogue, who is a, for lack of a better term, a Nostrodamus scholar. We'll forget, just to simplify things, we'll say
Right.
you are an expert in all things Nostradamus. Now, one thing I was wondering was, you had made mention that Nostradamus was the Gene Dixon of his era.
Yes.
And how do you feel his writings have survived? What kept his writings alive today when countless other things have been lost to the
those countless other things that have been lost? It's to understand that if there were many charlatans who were writing prophecies during his time.
Okay.
Now, you don't, except for the most fragmentary evidence of this, none of these people, even the people who wrote frauds in his name, they're not republished. But if this man, who some people believe is a charlatan, is still published today, it is just empirically illogical to think that one charlatan out of thousands would be in print almost as much as the Holy Bible, and he's one of the few people in the last 4 centuries that has been almost in publication. There's got to be a reason for that. And the other thing, too, is if you study the times, you know that many people were using obscurity and anagrams and word games in their writings.
So his use of those techniques was not unique in that.
Not at all. Ronsard, and even one of his great detractors, Ronsard being a great supporter, was a French Renaissance poet, but there was also Théodore de Bézet, who was the lieutenant to Calvin and the Calvinists, who also wrote actually superior puns, one being a total trashing of Nostradamus, in Latin. It was very common. But we aren't reprinting Bézet's work every other year. Ronsard, except for some of his poetry, are not being discoursed and debated as the object for scorn and the object for fascination. There's got to be something more happening here. And if one is to go deeper into that, one has to study these prophecies deeply to see, as I have after 30 years, and I contend that there is something more significant happening here. True, he's frustrating with his obscurity. True, he can be taken any which way. In fact, Nostradamus has been a tool of propaganda by many people, including none other than Joseph Goebbels, who saw, and all you need to do is read the Goebbels diaries to see his about 6 references in the diaries to using Nostradamus as a propaganda tool against the French. In 1939 and 40, before the invasion, they were dropping leaflets over the French lines saying that your man predicts your fall. There was an equal effort by Winston Churchill and a bank of his own astrologers to create, under the auspices and the expertise of Louis de Wool, who was an astrologer and Nostradamian, a number of prophecies showing that Germany would lose the war. America, under the auspices of Louis B. Mayer, an MGM, created you sometimes see them on American movie classics, these little shorts called Nostrodamus Says It's So.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And this was done to twist the poor 16th century man's words into seeing America winning the war. Now, you know what's ironic about this anecdotal story is that the one person working for the signs in this war, American, British, and German, the one person that was actually sincerely gifted and, although politically naive, and I think sincerely gifted in understanding and deciphering the prophecies, was the man who started the whole propaganda mess, a man who was working for the Gestapo, an astrologer from Swiss, Germany, called Karl Ernst Kraft. Now, he was a Nazi sympathizer and had worked for the Nazis. He had, using his own skills in astrology, predicted an assassination attempt by the day for Adolf Hitler and filed it away in the Gestapo files. Now, this was a very dangerous thing for him to do because at that time there was a law in the Reich that you could not make any predictions of any kind against the Fuhrer. So when he declared that he'd made this prediction, and when the Gestapo arrested him for doing it after the bombing in 1939 that nearly killed Hitler, which is also in the prophecies of Nostradamus, which he was alluding to in his prediction, he showed them the locked, filed away documents and sealed documents to prove that he had predicted it before the event. They then brought his attention to Goebbels and others in the propaganda ministry, and he was hired to write these booklets and leaflets that were spread over France. What is ironic about it is that he did correctly, I believe, interpret the prophecies that showed Maginot Line falling, as did Fontbrun on the other side was doing in France. The problem with Karl Ernst Kraft is he could not find a prophecy that showed in his mind that Hitler was going to win the war, and it drove him to a nervous breakdown.
Wow. So that's like an extreme example of everybody using.
And it's also an example of people who saw things using Nostradamus before the event.
WFMU, you're on the air with John Hogue.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, hello?
Hello.
I have a question, and I'll try to make it as simple as possible. It is in regards to, I hope that, Mr. Hogue, you can help me with this, Tamo or Tamo-san?
Well,
is that a name?
That she's a seeress from Japan, who I've met in India.
Well, it's an interesting coincidence of what is happening. I have had a series of dreams in which this name, you can be Tamo-san, which means nothing to me, has occurred. I finally decided to just look online to see if that meant anything, if it was something from my childhood, something I remembered or something. I did an online search, which then led to your name, which then I did that online search and found the radio station website that here you were on the air at the current time. And I just wonder.
Nice coincidence.
But if it is that you said it's a woman?
Tamo-san is a mystic from Japan that in my journeys through Asia I met in India, and she is in her 90s now, quite frail, but she made very interesting predictions that her daughter translated for the world at large in English, and I have quoted her in one of my books of collective prophecies of doomsday and what I call bloomsday predictions, called Millennium Book of Prophecy. And again, I quoted her in a book that looks at the coming of 30 messianic traditions, of 30 messiahs from mainstream to fringe, called Messiahs, the Visions and Prophecies for the Second Coming. Now,
Does she know? Have there been cases of her being in dreams or her existence being? Because I will sometimes think just about a friend or someone or a family member, and I'll be thinking about them, and then I'll just run into them. Or
the way that I deal with these things happening even in my own life is that it is important not to be for these events, not to be against them. This is the true meaning of skeptic. If you are truly skeptic in the way that the Greek word was intended, and not how it's been perverted by people who call themselves skeptics who are actually cynics, if you go into investigation either with a positive bias or a negative bias, you are only going to find the thing that fulfills that prejudice, whether it is a positive or negative prejudice. So in the study of mysterious, what are sometimes identified as mysterious events, or strange, or identified with the filter miraculous, is just simply to look at them, to neither be for them or against them, note them, and to not pull your energy any way for or against it. Just let it be.
But she's still alive, this woman.
Yeah.
So there's no way that I could be her.
No.
So
that's idiotic.
Certainly, if we, it makes me feel like I should visit her. But then if I got on a plane, and then that feels dangerous now. If she's old, I don't want to say, oh, she's going to die. That's mean,
but this is the problem. At least what I hear there is that you have your mind is wanting to do this and doing that, and just watch that, and then move.
So you're saying these things might not be telling you to go do something necessarily. You should just take them for whatever's happening. Just accept it, or just let it happen.
I thought it was an adjective. You can be Tomo-san.
Okay, well, it's
I thought it was like you can be better, or you can be.
Well, you can.
You can be better. But one of the ways. But if you're asking me, I can only share with you in that regard what my experience of being better, my discipline about being better is.
Is there a particular city in which she lives, or?
She lives outside of Tokyo.
So.
Okay, well, that's another subject.
But the thing I would just simply say is this is just the discipline that I follow in dealing with mysterious things and dealing with day-to-day life is simply a science of self-observation that is known also as meditation. That has been my religious discipline. It is not identified with any group, because to identify with any group is to go to the root of where the word identify comes from, and that is idios in Greek, which means idiot. Basically,
I get that.
Basically, we are all, for whatever intents and purposes I've viewed, that we are all trained from being innocent children. We are trained to become shaped as specific idiots for our specific time and culture and religious dogma and political dogma. There are idiots in Afghanistan, there are idiots called American idiots, there are European idiots, and essentially I don't use this term, even though it sounds like a pretty harsh term. I actually use this term as it was used by disciples of Gurdjieff, that idiot is basically the state of human beings who have lost their awareness of their unique and harmonious connection, body, mind, and spirit, with the cosmos.
That's how I feel. That's so how I feel.
Well, if you feel that, then there's no need to go anywhere.
But certainly, certainly.
So it
should
may
be
be
reaching
an
out
intellectual
to be proactive, or to be more proactive.
The thing is that I'll just say a little more on this is that you may feel this, but if I understand some of the studies where Gurdjieff used this term, that we are actually...
Spell Gurdjieff for me? I feel so bad about interrupting, but...
Yeah, well, don't. You can ask by an email at my website, www.hoagprophecy.com. There are three centers in that Gurdjieff talked about, and most of us don't work with all our centers functioning. For instance, you're hearing me perhaps with your heart. I'm responding to you in your from my head, and someone else is listening to this, and their gut is saying, "I don't understand any of this."
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that we're all trying sincerely to talk to each other, but until you've got all of your three major centers in your being working in harmony, your mind, your gut, and your heart, you're not going to be a whole man. You're going to be what Gurdjieff said is a man in quotation marks. And so my sense is, from listening to you, is I know you're sincere, but you're only hearing me from one of your centers. You're not hearing me from your whole mass.
It feels urgent, and then when you tell me that she's 90, God bless her, Confucius bless her.
You're not. You're not hearing me from what I'm saying, and I understand you're hearing part of it, and you're going off on that which that center can understand, but you are not listening to me with your whole mass, and that's okay. It's not a judgment. Unfortunately, it's just the fact of life, and that's why life on the earth is so difficult, because so many people, whether they're Afghanis speaking to Americans or Americans speaking to Al-Qaedis or Europeans speaking to this or that, we are all sincere in our beliefs that we have the truth, but we're all fragmented, conditioned, habitualized by traditions often fossilized that basically make us very predictable people, and that is why we have wars and predictable history in the past and repeated in the future.
Well, thanks for calling, caller.
Yes, thanks anyway. Sorry to be hard on you, but there it is.
Well, it didn't sound... It
Okay, well, I didn't mean to hang up on him like that. You know, something was of interest, which I was wondering what your... Obviously, you're not the only Nostrodamus scholar out there or expert, and there's a whole community. What is the general community like amongst people who analyze his writings? And I mean, is it a fractious community, or is it, or does everybody have a different take on everything, or are there general truths that everyone holds?
There would be what there would be a bit of all of that. The field of Nostrodamus is full of a lot of nuts and people who think that Nostradamus talks to them. And there's one person who's written a whole bunch of books where she's saying she's talking to the real Nostradamus in the 1550s. But when I met her and I asked why, after reading her books, didn't she test that? And she never really did. It'd be very easy to test if somebody was actually talking to the man. I also asked her why this man somehow could understand her English. And I also asked her why she describes his secret study in a way that shows that whoever she's talking to in the ethers is not at all the man she says he is, because where she describes his study completely made of stone and cold, dank, and dark, it totally goes against what we empirically know was Nostradamus' long search for very dry climates, because he was very sensitive to the damp. And if one has actually been in his house, which obviously she and her guide had never been, or her Nostradamus, you know that the study, even with changes over the centuries, is fundamentally a sandstone French South Provincial architectural design with heavy wooden beams and heavy wooden floor with plastered walls. It's not cold, dank, and dark, and it's not totally made of stone. So with this empirical study, you get sometimes that's the fringe.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side, that's what I call the blind believing Nostradamians, who just put any wild imaginative thing in and think that Nostradamus is speaking to them.
Okay.
On the other side, you have the blind disbelievers, who are basically folks who wave the banner of skepticism, but have been cynical enough to already have their opinions made before they even opened a book. And it is the same whether you're a fundamentalist fanatic of a religion or a fundamentalist scientist who is just a fanatic about that. If you have already made your conclusions before study, you will only find the things that suit your bias. Mm-hmm. So there's that kind of fringe Nostradamian. Now, in the center of all that are some people that are, I think, very sincere and scholarly, and also they may be too scholarly, where in case of Edgar Leone, who I very much admire, as he was the previous person before me to do a complete translation and dissertation on Nostradamus, and he published it in a very fine book back in 1961 called Nostradamus and His Prophecies, and I highly recommend it to anyone interested in Nostradamus. It is because of Edgar Leone that many of the modern scholars can function, because he did a lot of the really hard work. But the weakness of Edgar Leone's translation is his bias against mystical and occult disciplines. And that's almost like taking the vision of Nostradamus and putting it in black and white when it's in full color. Mm-hmm. So, not disrespectful to him, but honoring him, I also, out of my love for his scholarship, had to be critical sometimes of his work when he turned a blind empirical eye to those things which just didn't fit his left brain perception. And there are some Nostradamus scholars who try to find a balance between empirical scholarship, objective scholarship, and an experiential understanding of what this man subjectively went through by actually testing and studying certain techniques of oracular discipline, so that one can have an experience of what Nostradamus might have gone through. But there's a handful of people like Bardo Kadogo and J.C. Brennan, Stuart Robb, are other scholars that I would say are what I honor and admire as people trying to find the middle road with Nostradamus.
Mm-hmm. We have another call coming in here for John Hogue, WFMU. You're on the air.
Hello?
Hello?
Hi. Did she ever say that anything in her writings would happen to Utica, New York?
Nope. Next question.
We'll move on from that. Utica was not part of Nostradamus's frame of reference, I guess. WFMU, You're on the air.
I'm here. Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I just have two questions, and I'll get off. You can answer them. The first one is: was there a specific quatrain that referred to the third Antichrist being well versed in Mohammedan law? I seem to remember that. And the other question was: is there any specific quatrains that are pertain to something that hasn't happened yet that are of particular interest to Nostradamus scholars? And thanks a lot. It's very interesting.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you. Those were good questions. And yes, there is a verse about Mohammedan law. At this moment, I can't recall where it is, but if that person emails me at talktome@HogueProphecy.com, I will give that person or anybody else an answer to that question later. But also there are prophecies about there are two prophecies that could be about the third Antichrist, which, if you would like, I'd like to read for you.
Sure, absolutely.
Quatrain 62 of Century 2, which is the one about Mabus, says, Mabus will soon die, then will come a horrible undoing or slaughter of people and animals. At once one will see vengeance, 100 powers, thirst, famine, when the comet will pass. Now, that prophecy, the reason why I think Mabus is about the third Antichrist is because this It parallels a lot of the same events of another quatrain which mentions the third Antichrist, that phrase, outright, and that's quatrain 77 of century 8, which, so I'll read that, and then we'll look at the different lines and see how they parallel. That says, the third Antichrist very soon annihilated. 27 years his bloody war will last. The heretics dead, captives exiled, blood-soaked human bodies, and a reddened icy hail covering the earth. Now, you read line 1 of the first, Mobbus will soon die. Line 1 of the second prophecy, the third Antichrist very soon annihilated. And when you see in the French and in the translations a similarity, that is always, any good Nostradamus scholar raises a flag to say, okay, this prophecy may be linked, because the prophecies were scattered out of sequence. There's a
and that was that a deliberate thing?
Yes.
Okay, is that part of that you had mentioned about the damning of?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's part of the obscuring. Now, there's no mention of him doing that I can recall, but if you look at the way the prophecies are, sometimes they're bundled together and sometimes they're not, and it's kind of brought up an interesting, probably apocryphal tale about Nostradamus, because people over the centuries have been noticing that if you read them, they almost look like something that was in sequence, but like thrown up in the air and then gathered, and it has this kind of similar pattern, like if you had little slips of paper and threw them up in the air and then gathered them, and then the way in which they were gathered is the way in which they are put in order. And I think because of that pattern in the themes, somebody centuries ago began what is probably an apocryphal tale that said that he and his chief disciple Chauvigny had put the prophecies on slips of paper and had Chauvigny throw them in the air onto the ground, then pick them up in whatever sequence they were fallen. Be that as it may, the way to uncover that and find links from one prophecy from one volume to another is these hints of similar themes, and those two lines seem similar to me. They're followed in the first prophecy, by a horrible undoing of people and animals. It's an interesting use of both animals and men being killed by something the same. He doesn't often say something like that. And then you have on the other prophecy the statement, after 27 years his bloody war will last, just a horrible undoing of people and animals. Well, a 27-year war would be that, a bloody war. To me, these are linked. So, now, it's also interesting to note that at once they will see vengeance. Often he uses words that deal with surprise, ambush, subterfuge, vengeance, and often related to visions that look like you could interpret as some kind of a terrorist event, some surprise. 100 powers. He uses the word main for hand. That's its generic meaning. But in old French poetic times of the Renaissance, main, the word for hand, is also a word for power, authority, nations. So I translate it to mean 100 powers or nations. Now, often his apocalyptic prophecies will have the litany of thirst, famine, or thirst, famine, war, or a cycle of centuries renewed when there's thirst, famine, war, and disease. And these are also hints that it's at a time during a great renewal of the centuries, which we've just gone through with the millennium, when there's famine in the world and great and wide-reaching droughts and other climatic disruptions. These themes often come together talking about events of a man, a king of terror. One prophecy, quatrain 72, century 10, even dates the time for this king of terror, to descend from the skies at a time when they will resurrect the great king of the Mongols. Before and after war rules happily, or Mars rules happily, depending on how you translate that. Now, 1999 and 7 months did not see anybody come from the skies, And one way you can look at this is that perhaps Nostradamus, with the free will of prophecy, has gotten off by a couple years. I contend that the terror from the skies is multifaceted and man-made. And back in 1999 in July, I declared that this prophecy is about the sudden spike of interest and disasters coming from the descent from our skies called the terror of global warming. And I still contend that that is probably more about global warming than about a terrorist descending from the skies. Because sometimes Nostradamus hides a person behind the guise of a phenomenon, or a phenomenon behind the guise of a person.
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
And it's just part of his obscurity. So the other thing that makes that prophecy interesting is the one about 1999 and 7 months, is that some people have written me saying, well, isn't sept mois the 7th month, and that was in the old calendars September? And I said, well, yeah, that's true, it's September, and isn't it easy to stretch that from out of 1999 when it was actually September 2001 that this event happened? But still, I'm not dismissive of that. I mean, it's possible that Nostradamus got the month right and the year wrong. And when you're seeing things 4 centuries ago, and it takes such a tremendous amount of predictability for dates to be fulfilled. Although there are many prophecies I can cite in my books of dates that were seen hundreds of years before the event coming true right on the date and the month. But it's very rare that that happens, even amongst the great prophets. So, the key to that prophecy is they shall resurrect the great king of the Mongols. It's interesting to note that after the Tiananmen Square massacre in the following year, I think it was 1990, the leaders of the communist premiership that run China felt that for propaganda reasons it was a good thing to resurrect the name and stature of Genghis Khan. And in the schools, and this is documented, in the schools, Chinese children were indoctrinated to consider Genghis Khan and his descendants, even though they were Mongols, to have brought China to its last great state of superpowerdom in the world. Okay. And so it is it's very interesting that he should put in the same prophecy an event that happened a decade earlier. Also, you'll find in Quatrain 62 of Century 2, which talked about Mobus, you see the talk about 100 powers thirst, famine, when the comet will pass. Well, I've always felt, at first when I started writing books, I thought it might apply to Halley's Comet coming in 1986. But I always didn't rule out the fact that some other surprising large-scale comet might appear closer to the millennium that would be closer to 1999. Indeed, that happened in 1997 with the coming of Hale-Bopp, the great comet that we saw in the skies. And indeed, there may be another great comet that's coming in a year from now, which will even be more pertinent to the events of the day.
I guess we will stay tuned for that. Let me get another. WFMU, you're on the air with John Hogue.
Hello?
Hello?
Am I on the air?
Yes, you are. Could you turn your radio down, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've heard that Nostradamus was Jewish. Is that true?
Yes. There has been debate on whether he was, but even some of the skeptics agree that the evidence shows there's more debate on whether his grandfathers were actually physicians of the court of René the Good, who was the last great king of Provence. But even if they look at some of the documents, the fragments seem to point to him being Jewish origin, either from Italy or from the diaspora from Spain. Because at the time, Provence was a haven of toleration in Europe, and it was a time, a place where you would often find many Moors and many Saracens, Muslims, doing business with Europeans, and there were very thriving Jewish communities. And there is an indication that in the baptismal records of Nostradamus that about his father and mother that it implies in the wording that they were Jewish converts. As many people who were physicians at that time and apothecaries and pharmacists were actually part of the underground Christianized, though Jewish society.
We are joined by John Hogue, Nostradamus scholar. The phone number 201-200-9368. The phones have been going crazy, and we have another call here. WFMU, you're on the air. WFMU, you're on the air. Oh, phones aren't going that crazy.
Sounds like they're in the ether.
Well, let's see. So, actually, a ton of people have been calling who we haven't been able to get to. We're in the home stretch of the program, so now's as good a time as any to call. Somebody emailed in a question, Paul, and this is something I honestly know nothing about, but maybe you can shed some light on this, John. He asks if you have ever studied Spica, S-P-I-C-A, rising over Philly on July 4th, 1776. Spica, of course, is the Redeemer, or shaft of wheat. This would seem to tell us that our founding fathers, the Rosicrucians and Freemasons, knew exactly what they were doing. I mean, is this anything that do you have any?
Oh, well, it would be perhaps a subject of a whole show, but it again, if one is skeptical in the true sense of that word, one does not deny the potential significance, but also one doesn't deny the potential coincidence. Let's go to another question.
Okay, absolutely. WFMU, you're on the air. WFMU, you're on the air. Don't tell me the phones are failing me. Okay. I think I figured out what was wrong with them. Okay. So I'm sorry I hung up on you, caller. Please call back. 201-200-9368. Now, a question I had. Actually, here's the person calling right back, so we'll be fair to them. WFMU, you're on the air. Okay. We're getting closer. I heard them there that time, at least. Okay.
The squeak of their electronic etheric.
That's right. WFMU, you're on the air.
Yeah, was his last name originally Nussbaum instead of Nostradamus?
No, well, that's...
Well, no.
I mean, what is
it was, the word is Latin for Our Lady, which was a colloquial, idiomatic phrase for cathedral. You could almost say his Christianized name was Michael Cathedral, because one always called a Notre Dame Our Lady, the church being Our Lady. That's not the Church of Notre Dame. That's what it means. And so he liked. That is just the strange etymological flow of how a name is created.
Our guest is Nostradamus scholar John Hogue. The phone number 201-200-9368. The lines are pretty clear right now, so if you were one of the people who was on hold before, now's your chance to get back in. A question I had was, I guess a lot of people in my generation, in their early 30s, late 20s, they came, the first exposure they had to Nostradamus would have been that Orson Welles narrated movie.
Yes,
now,
The Man Who Saw Tomorrow.
Yes. Now, I guess obviously, what is your take on that movie as an expert?
Surprisingly good. Of course, Orson Welles was was not only a great actor, and he was one of my cinematic heroes, but he could also be wonderfully campy, and he kind of moved from camp to profundity in that documentary. But I've got to say that that documentary had some very accurate insights, foreknowledge documented, that to go back to that original questioner's point about why is it always hindsight that brings interest in the Nostradamus. All you need to do is go listen to that documentary, and you will see some pretty remarkable things that are attempted in that documentary to reenact that terrorists from the Middle East, about someone using a missile, about there's also the instance that at the time I saw it in 1982 when it came out, I disagreed with it. My bias was against this idea that Orson Welles in his script read that 1999, the prophecy is actually the beginning of the 27-year war of the third Antichrist. And I even published in my first few books an argument against that, saying that it's actually a countdown back from 1999 to the year 1972-73 period, when in my own attempt at that time to fit things according to my bias, I thought that the year 2000 this would all be over. As I got deeper into the study, and I believe that even scholars, if they are dynamic and alive, are not going to be as rigid as stone, and when they see changes, they will also evolve their interpretations, just as the future evolves from the changes in the present. And so in 1997, in the Nostrodamus, the Complete Prophecies full examination, in that book, I reversed myself and openly said, yes, I used to feel it was the other way around, but I do think that Orson Welles documentary is correct, that the events would not come into culmination at the end in 1999, but that 1999 was the beginning of the 27-year war.
Okay. WFMU, you're on the air with John Hogue.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering if John would speculate a little bit on the sort of secondary notion of prophecy, which is that if someone is able to prophesy something way in the future, that's some indication of either a spiritual world or divine or something like that. Did you say something
well,
like that?
It is a good question, and often I get it in a slightly different form. There's a couple forms in which I get that question. So there's the way you've put it, and essentially the question being, is it some divine gift to see the future? And there's a couple ways that's looked at. The writings attributed to Moses in Deuteronomy give a clear do's and don'ts and kind of a litmus test for prophets. On whether they're really, one being, as I understand the scripture, that they're always accurate, they never make a mistake. Well, there's only one problem with this very powerful argument. It is the only argument that survives from that period. You don't hear what the Chaldeans had to say about Moses' prophecies or people's prophecies of the Nephilim, the book of the prophets in the old, what the Christians call the Old Testament. It's like this. Although the argument's great, it would be like me being your only source for finding out if something's accurate, and no other counter source to corroborate or criticize your statement. Whether it's true or not, it's not something that one can empirically say is studyable, because if I'm your only source and I'm telling you I'm perfect and this is how you are to be perfect, it's not to be taken too seriously. But now that's one extreme side of the question. The other side is a lot of people sincerely think that there are powers that we have rarely tapped, that the frontier of the human mind is probably more the final frontier than poor James T. Kirk's space statement, that the human mind and human consciousness is something that we use very little of, and is a great potential untapped, and that when we tapped into it, we are in touch with our higher selves. That's the kind of more New Age version of that. Then there's the other rather disturbing reality, if one studies prophecy for years, is that many people who are what I would view as monstrous in their views and values, some of them, one of them being Adolf Hitler, was a very good prophet. When he was not directly predicting things about his own person, and his own personal biases, he made rather frighteningly remarkable prophecies in his conversations at the dinner table, which were transcribed all through the war. And you can read them in a rather turgid book about 500 pages long called The Secret Conversations of Adolf Hitler, which is documented, corroborated by John Toland and others, that he did do these descriptions. Trevor Roper, I think, edited in the book. It was another important scholar on Hitler. And I must say, most of it is just beer hall bunk and really turgid and boring work, but every once in a while he has these flashes where he's describing what later became the creation of the Green Party. He's describing how people would need to, that the climate would have serious problems, and that industries would have to recycle their waste. And he, one of his most chilling prophecies was stated after he had his collapse, emotional collapse, when he finally let go of the idea of winning, when the Russians were literally knocking on his door with their artillery shells. In his bunker, he was recorded saying about 48 hours before he committed suicide, he said, well, we've lost this conflict. I'm paraphrasing this. And the next conflict the world will be left to the two great powers, America and Russia. And that they would probably fight a war, but it would be more economic and ideological than perhaps military. He didn't believe they'd actually fight a third world war. And it would be a fight of ideas and economy and belief systems, and that they would use Germany as the cutting edge of this struggle. It's a remarkable prophecy.
Wow, that's right.
But he's an evil man. You would not call him a divinely inspired person.
No.
Which brings me to, if bear with me to this long way of just answering your question, one thing seems certain, at least at this moment to me, that the ability to see the future is perhaps indeed a gift of the mind, but that does not mean it is even necessary to have this as a gift of your consciousness. What I'm saying it is something that is genetic. It's something that is a mental thing, and I'm posing to anyone that there are many mystics who couldn't predict a thing, who were full of love and beauty and awareness, and some of them do. It's not a symptom of divinity in a person. It's just a more sensitive mind. But sensitive minds can be anchored, tied to a consciousness which is aware, or a consciousness which is unaware of itself. To me, personally, I feel there's only one Antichrist in the world. It is human unconsciousness. And there's only one Christ, if you will, and that's the consciousness in all of us. And it's really a question of what degree one awakens to the consciousness within us, or one is a victim and slave of the unconscious habits in us.
Well, that's actually a very interesting way of looking at everything. We have another WFMU. You're on the air.
Yeah. I'd like to just make a comment about the way that your guest seems to handle skeptics. I realize that there are cynical people out there, and it's easy enough to write them off, but when you make really fantastic claims, the burden of proof is on you. And you're really not making the case, I think, to a lot of people. And I don't think that you just dismiss them as being lazy. Just the fact that I haven't read 16th century French manuscripts
means you're lazy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good one. You got to admit he got you there.
You're lazy. It's okay. I'm not against lazy people. I love lazy people. But it's like, look, if you want to be a skeptic, do the study, and if you use the logic, and I understand it's a good point you make, but understand, my friend, this is radio. I've just been on for an hour. If you have the intelligence to investigate and test, because you're right, the burden of proof is on me.
Right.
If you don't want to buy one of my books, go to the library. If you, in my own books, I give sources, pages, chapters, and verses to the skeptics who are against what I say, and I look at their points of view too. a skeptic doesn't draw conclusions from a few dozen words listened to on a night on radio. He goes in and
right.
finds out.
And I'm not talking about just what you've had to say tonight. I have read on the subject. I haven't read your books, and there are people out there that do read up on this stuff and try to understand it and try to believe it. I think a lot of people would like to, but it's hard to. And the thing is, I don't have to go back and read the original manuscripts of, say, Leonardo da Vinci's studies to learn science and physics now, because scholars have been able to take them and interpret them and build on them. And so
well, of course, but hold on. I know, but first off, you're assuming that you will not have that opportunity to do that in my book. Now, if you would open up one of my books, especially Nostradamus, The Complete Prophecies, you will see next to the English translation the original French.
Okay.
So again, it's like, it's not that what you're saying is wrong. It isn't, but your modus operandi to getting there is not that of a skeptic. It's that of a lazy guy, which is okay. If you want to get into it, if you want to pass observations on what my work is, read me.
So
be a skeptic. Read it.
So there has to be a give and take. You can't. It's like tennis. It's back and forth. Well, we just lost him. So.
I mean, I don't know what it is about the American culture, but it seems that the particular conditioning that has created our society has created a society of people who worship being functionally literate, functionally researching, functionally skeptic.
Mm-hmm.
And I sometimes, whether it applies to us or not, there is one observation in Nostradamus's letter to Henry II, which I, biased or not, would apply to the American people today. He said, "I see in the future time, what a great loss of learning and letters." I mean, in a way, he's looking at people and basically predicting the great and glorious dumb down of modern society, where people think that just a few lines here and a few bromides from journalists or politicians or others have suddenly made them experts on life. And I've even had people who say, "Hey, well, I have a right to have an opinion," and they're almost deeply hurt because I've kind of brushed off their opinion. I said, "Hey, your right to have an opinion is not the question here. Your opinion is groundless, and that's okay. But I have a right to brush it off because I've done the work."
Mm-hmm.
So I wish that someone out there would be a real skeptic and make this interesting, because often I'm dealing with the armchair experts.
Sure. Wait, another call coming in for John Hogue, WFMU. You're on the air.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Mr. Hogue.
Hello.
I was just wondering, when do Nostradamus' prophecies run out? I mean, which is to say, of the 36,000 words of prophecy, what percentage of them can you check off as having already happened?
I think that as I kind of go through all of them in Nostradamus, The Complete Prophecies, I think people read it will see that I think the majority of them are more and more about times a few centuries after his life, and that they're less and less as you get into the 21st century.
Okay.
But there is clearly one date. It's in the preface at the beginning of the first set of volumes of Centuries, where he predicts that the Earth will end in the year 3797 AD, which is just short of 1,800 years from now.
Oh, that's interesting.
Now, what's interesting also about this prediction is that it is he's basically describing a final conflagration which describes the Earth's orbit is destroyed, but the orbit of Mars will continue around the Sun. And this conflagration he describes like great meteors coming and burning off everything on the surface of the Earth, and that only thing that's surviving are the ethnographies, which is this very strange, I don't think he even uses it that way, but it's a word that it means the races of the world, and implies that they have survived this, but the Earth is burnt.
And so they would have moved on to Mars or something.
Or then he says, and then long before and after this time, people will live in Aquarius and Cancer. And the way he states that, it's not like in the age of, which wouldn't work because there's no age of Cancer afterwards. But it's almost in the syntax of the way he says it. It says to me that living literally around stars in those constellations, 1,800 years from now. That's my interpretation of that. Okay. And then he makes a statement after that they shall live on for time immemorial, and in a way saying forever from there. It's almost what I get for that is that once we are free of the dangers of living in a world that can be destroyed by cosmic ejecta or whatever, when we perhaps at that time are more a galactic society, then we will be free of the sudden extinction that can happen to people who are bound to their worlds. Now, one final point about that and about everything, I guess, tonight, is that, astronomers would agree with Nostradamus in getting the mass right of the sun turning into a red giant. Certainly they would not agree with his time.
Right.
Billions of years in the future. But isn't it interesting that an astrologer from the 16th century gets the mass of solar material of a red giant right? That the sun would expand near or around the orbit of Earth, and that Mars would continue its orbits around the sun. This is agreed to by the staunchest astronomers. Very interesting.
That is interesting. Now, how do his prophecies of the destruction of the Earth relate to the prophecies in Revelation, for instance?
Well, the book of Revelation, I'm arguing in more and more times, is really the greatest prophetic goof in 2,000 years, because it all hinges on the beast being a numeric value of the letters that spell out in numerical value 666, which up to the last 2,000 years has only been a man who's been long, long dead, who was a contemporary of St. John. That was Nero Caesar.
Right.
That's what it spells out to. So it's about an end of the world. It's the first end of the world is coming that the Christian prophetic traditions tried to proffer off, and it was a complete failure. And there are people today for 2,000 years who I feel have been hypnotized by a certain dogma, apocalyptic dogma, who are trying to create it today. And they could partially pull it off. But that could be the subject of an entire other show, just in itself.
Yes, and we're in the home
Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for calling, Cole.
Thank you.
Well, I think we have just a couple minutes left, and I think we have one final call coming in here, and then we will say goodnight to Mr. John Hogue. WFMU, you're on the air.
Hello. I was listening to your program, and hopefully, I think maybe I have a point that might make things a bit interesting.
Okay, we've got to make it quick.
Okay. I remember once reading an interesting piece of science fiction about an organization that hunted down prognosticators, not because that they doubted them, not because that they were predicting the future, but they were causing it. And I was thinking, these days we now are lowering the distinctions between observer and observed.
Mm.
Right? We're not just observing phenomena, but by the act of observation, we are making changes upon it.
Well,
and I was wondering what the guest might want to think about that.
It's a wonderful statement, wonderful thing to talk about. We could talk a whole hour about this, because really this is the theme, one of the subplots of my book, Messiahs, The Visions and Prophecies for the Second Coming, is there's two sides of prophecy. One is it's looking at the future, and the other is it is propaganda.
Okay. Well, I guess this caller could find more information on your books at your website, which is a nice segue.
www.hogueprophecy.com. That is all one word, lowercase, HOGUEPROPHECY.
Okay.
You have it as S on the website. It's not the verb version. It's prophecy with a C.
Okay, so that is the place to get more information. And John Hogue, I thank you so much for spending 2 hours with us and talking all about the Nostradamus and yourself, and answering people's questions. And thank you very
Tom.
much. And you have a good night.
You too.
All right, good night. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, we're in the the overlap period of the show. If 8 to 9 is the tune-up, 9 to 10:30 is where we catch a fire. 10:30 to 10:50 is when we peak. 10:50 to 11 is the cool down. 11, anything past 11 is just thievery. We're stealing someone else's program. So I shall say goodnight to all of you. This is the best show on WFMU. My name's Tom Scharpling. I'll be back next week at 8 p.m. Stay tuned for Nickel and Dime Radio on WFMU East Orange, WXHD Mount Hope worldwide on the World Wide Web at WFMU.org. And thanks for listening.